This Friday, from Disney, the musical movie event of the year arrives in theaters.
My name is Snow White.
Flawless.
Exquisite.
Get tickets now.
Waiting on a wind.
Snow White will have you on your feet
I think that's a wonderful idea.
and cheering for more.
I was thinking the same thing.
Experience the magical story.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest one of all?
Snow White.
Disney's Snow White. Only in theaters Friday. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Tickets on sale now.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. When we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Tudors Dynasty and Beyond. And today I am very excited to welcome back to the show two of my favorite people, Mel Taylor and Sylvia Barbara Soberton. Welcome, ladies.
Hi. Hello. Thank you for having me again.
Well, today I invited both of you here because we're going to talk about something that has been in the press and all over social media for the last couple of weeks in particular. And that is a portrait that is by some believed to be Lady Jane Grey. And I'm going to start with Sylvia. Mm-hmm. Sylvia, why don't you introduce the portrait, tell everybody what it's called, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. So it's a Wrest Park portrait, and it's been announced in the news that this is very likely a portrait of Lady Jane Grey, so England's, 9 days queen. So she was Queen of England from 10th July of 1553 until she was deposed by her cousin, Mary I, Henry VIII's elder daughter, on 19th July 1553. And Jane was tragically executed on 12th February 1554. Now, we don't really have description of what Jane Grey really looked like. There are no confirmed likenesses of her, so we don't really have a comparison. There was this description of Jane Grey believed to be by an eyewitness. That description says that she had small features, that she had well-made nose, that she had red hair, freckles and reddish brown eyes and so on. But this has been proven to be a hoax by Leanda Delisle in her biography of the Grey Sisters. Now, the portrait so far has been identified as Mary Fiennes, Baroness Dacre, but it has a history of being linked to Jane Grey because in 1681, Robert White created an engraving of the painting as an illustration of Lady Jane Grey in Gilbert Burnet's renowned History of the Reformation of the Church of England. So the link with Jane Grey isn't really new. But what's new is the research by the English Heritage that they argue that this may be very well a posthumous portrait of Lady Jane Grey.
Yeah, and so I invited Melanie Taylor, who is an art historian, here on the show today because, let's talk to somebody who has studied art history and understands how all the examinations of these portraits happen. Melanie, can you tell the audience what kind of testing was done on this painting and how that helps determine who it could be?
Well, Rachel Thorogood, who was the art historian who has done this, on the technical analysis, she was working with the Courtauld and also Ian Tyas, who is a dendrochronologist. And by using infrared, which is just one of the means of being able to look under the top layers, they realized that the portrait has been altered to what it is now. Now, on dendrochronology, the database for this is expanding all the time, and Ian is the top dendrochronologist, I'd say, in the UK. It's been the Baltic oak on which it's painted has been dated to between 1539 and 1571.
And also on the back of it, there's a merchant or a cargo mark, which is identical to the one used on the royal portrait of Edward VI. And that we know is by William Scrots. However, this portrait, for me, it's great, yes, but there are various other artists who could have gone and got Baltic oak panels from the same merchant, from the same cargo. I'm trying very hard to be devil's advocate. I'm going to fail miserably. And that is Hans Ewert. You know, Hans Ewert was around. Mary finds, and the double portrait of her with her son Gregory, which is dated 1559, I think, is definitely by Hans Ewert. Now, one of the things here is that the infrared reflectography has shown that at some point or other, the sitter's eyes, mouths, and ears were deliberately scratched out. Now, that has been argued that this is because she was, you know, it's iconoclasm because she was the queen, wrongly, 1543 Act of Succession, Henry's one, trumped the, you know, Edward's device. Therefore, anybody who had a portrait of Jane Grey would deface it or have it painted over. And this is where I now can't play devil's advocate, because if you look at the portrait and you compare it to the later portraits of Lady Mary Neville, stroke Fiennes, you can see it's a younger, in my view, and I think you'll agree with me, Sylvia, it's a younger version of the same person.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So this portrait has been identified as Mary Neville Fiennes Lady Dacre, Baroness Dacre. It's an identification that's several years old. The first, I think it was Susan Foister who suggested it, and then Stephen Edwards built up on that. And so why is this portrait identified as Mary Fiennes? Well, the provenance is probably the strongest piece of evidence in this puzzle, because the portrait belonged to Dorothy North Leonard, who was the second wife and widow of Richard Leonard, the 13th Baron Dacre, before it was acquired in 1701 by Henry Grey, 12th Earl of Kent. Now, the sitter's costume is humble, and she's wearing black, she's having a book in her hand, and she has violets suspended from her pearl necklace. Now, this is all indicative that she is in mourning, and her husband was executed in 1541. And Mary was always depicted in portraits as a grieving widow, despite her later remarriage. Now, as you say, Melanie, the physical resemblance between the sitter in the Wrest Park portrait and Mary Fiennes is also very telling. We have at least, I think, 2 or 3 portraits of Mary Fiennes to compare to. And I think you are absolutely right that there is a remarkable resemblance in the way the faces are depicted in those portraits.
Well, I have to say, a great friend of mine, Professor Wiltshire, who's a forensic botanist, strangely enough. But one of the things she says, the best computers for facial recognition are the one between our ears. And you've only got to look at the faces and say, hey, there's tremendous similarity here. But if you actually put facial recognition software through it, I'm waiting for an email to come back from a chum of mine who's done some stuff. He's out in Canada. A guy called JP Doucette. He's great. But he's a retired IT chap who does a lot of this stuff to find out whether or not he agrees with what you and I can see immediately. Now, one of the things which I found, particularly when I was studying the Holland Basiologia, was that there are an awful lot of paintings which are just taken, and particularly where it comes to Anne Boleyn, they will, because we don't know what she looked like either, apart from, you know, the gay, she was the one wearing the French hood, she's got the pointed chin. But there's some research into that as to how people actually built their own books using engravings, which makes all of the Basilogia engravings of kings and queens right the way back to William I, and we certainly don't have any portraits of him, suspect. And particularly when it comes to Wrest Park, when the owner in the present house was one Thomas de Grey, the second Earl of Grey. And his dates are, where are we? 1781 to 1859. And he was the first president of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Now, if you've got an unknown lady, and I actually wrote an article back in 2020 on the difficulty of identifying 16th century portraits of unknown ladies and gentlemen. And I actually cite the double portrait of Lady Mary Neville and Gregory, and also the one where she's alone, again painted by Ewith, and she's seen from the other side, because in the double portrait she's on the left and looking to the right, and then the single portrait she's on her own and she's looking to the left, and her husband is in a frame. And he's clearly dead. Now, if you go back to why her husband was executed, it gets a bit iffy. 1541, he had been well in Henry VIII's good books, and suddenly he and his mates go off because the game on the neighbouring estate was really good, and unfortunately one of the gamekeepers gets killed accidentally, and suddenly he's arrested along with everybody else and initially pleads not guilty. Throw yourself on the King's mercy. What a good idea. If you say, yes, I'm guilty, throw yourself on the King's mercy. What was happening in 1541 at court? Who was in charge? Who had the King's ear? Duke of Norfolk. Lady Mary Neville is the youngest daughter. Her mother was the youngest daughter of Edward Stafford,
the Duke of Buckingham. Yeah.
Yes.
So the old rivalry springs up.
There's old rivalries. There are the Plantagenets sitting there.
Yes.
So was it a trumped-up charge in 1541?
Well, Mary certainly believed so. I have a chapter about her and this double portrait of herself and her son Gregory in my book, Secrets of the Tudor Portraits. The chapter is entitled A Case of Mistaken Identity, Frances Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, or Mary Fiennes, Baroness Dacre. Because this double portrait was... I know it isn't, but it has been labeled as Frances and her younger husband, Adrian Stokes, for many, many years. And this portrait was actually used to blacken Frances's reputation because it was mislabeled as Frances, and it was believed that she was presenting this younger husband of hers like a trophy. She's standing with him. And it's actually crazy how you can use a portrait to blacken someone's reputation like that. Because A, it's not Frances. B, her husband Adrian wasn't that much younger than her. I think he was only 2 years or so younger. But of course, in the Jane Grey story, Frances is perhaps the villain, because we have those various sources, which actually just one source where Lady Jane Grey says, well, I like to be with my tutor. He's very kind and gentle. And when I'm with my parents, I'm basically in hell because they use these bobs and pins and, they are very demanding of me. So this is how Frances's reputation became blackened. And she also quickly remarried after her husband's execution. So that's also not a good look for many people who wrote about her later on. But the double portrait of Mary Fiennes and her son Gregory actually is a very beautiful and interesting portrait, because Mary Fiennes is standing on the right. she's on the place in the exact spot where a man should be standing.
Yep.
And she's presenting her beautiful, handsome son. And there is a reason she's doing that, because she was trying very hard for Gregory to reclaim the barony of Dacre with the lands and the title, all of it. And that's why she's presenting this beautiful son of hers to the world, you know. And it really shows you how powerful, I guess, and how determined she was to first petition the Queen, because she was petitioning either Queen Mary I or Elizabeth I. She was very determined. She assumed this powerful spot on the right. And also, I think her son didn't really play that active of a role in petitioning, that she took the main role. And there's also this portrait of Eworth where she's sitting in a high-backed chair. And again, this was very unusual to present a woman with the writing utensils. She's writing, she's pensive. There is this page in front of her, the book, the clock symbolizing the passage of time. And behind her is the picture of her late executed husband and the date. So overall, I think Mary really liked to use portraiture to show her image, to highlight that she was first the widow of the Baron Dacre, although she remarried and had other children. But her firstborn, her most important, was Gregory, the son for whom she actually wanted, who was the son and heir of her husband. So it's interesting how you could use portraiture to that end, and how we have really, this story of Mary in portraits, because she's this young widow with a book standing, just being portrayed as a widow, black dress, violets for remembrance. Then we have her with her son and writing a petition, in an act of writing a petition. So that's really beautiful and powerful.
I think it's also a very political portrait, because she is queen of all she surveys in both instances.
Yes.
And, her firstborn, Thomas, unfortunately had died at the age of 15,
yes.
which is a great shame. And I'm going to throw a real big spanner in the works here. Do you know the work of Roberta Millikan? Her PhD was on how women wear their hair.
No.
Her book is called Ambiguous Locks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fascinating, which led me to study beards.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Gregory is clean shaven.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is he young, or is he not interested in women?
Oh.
I know he gets married and I know that he has children, but I'm just throwing this out there.
Mm-hmm.
Is this another hidden side of what's in that double portrait? But it's also, if Mary wasn't in funds, how could she afford Hans Eworth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was the artist himself actually aware of exactly what was going on, what was happening here? The rumors going around court wouldn't be thrown, we wouldn't know them because they've not been documented. But when you put yourself in that context, there's so many questions that you could chuck into the mix that you think, wow. But the biggest one, of course, is, for me, the revelation that her ears and her eyes had all been scratched out. Why was that?
Mm-hmm.
Was it to silence the Plantagenet line? Or, go back to being devil's advocate, was it Jane Grey and it was a case of, we're going to do all of this because we don't want to be seen to be supporting the Queen?
Mm-hmm. Well, if the scratches I don't think the scratches were deliberate, to be perfectly honest, because they look like it may have been just something like damage during the transportation. We know that portraits were transported between residences, so perhaps the damage was done during one of the transportations. I think that if someone wanted really to deliberately scratch her eyes out, I think it would
done a better job.
You would have done a better job. Yes, exactly. So that's one of the reasons why I don't think that we could use that as an argument that this is Jane Grey because her eyes are scratched out. I don't think that this is a good job at scratching.
Well, what I hope, I know that Rachel is a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. What I'm hoping is that they will do a presentation on a lunchtime, one of their lunchtime talks later in the year, and that she will show her findings, because, you know, infrared, yeah, it's a bit blurry, but it's actually quite accurate. So it'd be interesting to see that. Or are they going to make a paper public about that? And certainly Wrest Park are, you know, they've put a lot of money into this, as has English Heritage, because, of course, it's the Holy Grail, isn't it? If it's proved to be Jane Grey.
Can I play the devil's advocate?
Yes.
Yep. It's nice to have two devils around.
You know what? I can definitely see the similarities in Lady Dacre, seeing how it could be her. But do you guys not see the resemblance to like Henry VIII's face?
Well, why wouldn't it?
Well, if it were Lady Jane Grey, it would.
Would it?
I don't. Maybe.
Henry, when he was young, Henry's face was quite pointy. If you look at the early portraits in the National Portrait Gallery, it was only when he got fat and bloated and gouty and horrible and psychotic and psychopathic that he ended up looking like a huge, great Pillsbury doughboy.
Are you saying that the woman in the portrait looks like the Pillsbury doughboy?
No. Well, she's certainly plumptious.
When I looked at it and the announcement was made that it could be Lady Jane Grey, I immediately saw Tudor features, and maybe that's because it was implanted in my mind that it was her, so I was looking for it. I don't know. I don't know who it is, but of course I want it to be Lady Jane Grey.
I think many people want it to be Lady Jane Grey because, like Melanie said, it is a holy grail. Everybody wants to know what she looked like, right?
And it would add to the value hugely, wouldn't it?
Of course, I think that's one of the reasons why we have this identification, because Mary Fiennes is, I would say, largely unknown to people outside of the academia. She's not that famous, so a portrait of Mary Fiennes wouldn't attract as many people as a portrait of Lady Jane Grey. So here we are. But I personally, I don't think, I was expecting to see more like concrete evidence that this is Lady Jane Grey indeed in the Wrest Park portrait, which I haven't seen. I'm not convinced. I still believe, based on everything that has been out there, that this is most likely Mary Fiennes as a young woman, as a young widow.
I totally agree. I mean, the penultimate paragraph, oh no, it's the ultimate paragraph, and this is from the Society of Antiquaries newsletter. It says, ultimately, while it is not possible to prove beyond doubt that this is a portrait of LJG, our results certainly make a compelling argument. It is possible we are looking at the shadows of a once more royal portrait of Lady Jane Grey, toned down into subdued Protestant martyrdom after her death. Jury's out. Which is why I'd like, I can't wait for someone to actually either do a program on this. What it would be nice, Sylvia, is we've both got an invite to a silver screening. Wouldn't it be fantastic?
That would be fantastic, yes. And about the clothing, I wanted to say something, because the clothing, we are usually told that Lady Jane Grey would have been probably posing in, humble dress, humble headdress, and so on. But interestingly, when Robert White made that engraving in 1681, he added the ermine, and I think he added, I have to look at the picture to see, what did he add there? Yes, he added the ermine, and he added some, the French hood is decorated because originally in the painting, the sitter was wearing this French hood. And what we see today is the white coif, so toned down. But apparently, even in 1681, it was believed that the portrait is too humble to represent a queen. So Robert White added more little buttons, jeweled buttons and ermine to make her look more regal. So it's a matter, I think, of question whether Jane Grey would have been represented as a martyr wearing, humble clothes, or as queen wearing more elaborate clothing to, express her status through clothing.
I mean,
so it's another question. Very interesting.
Yeah, I find that fascinating because trying to put us, ourselves in that June, July 1553. I mean, A, it's summer, B, it's hot. C, England is in turmoil. You've got Mary up in Norfolk, and you've got the people flocking to her. You've got Northumberland in a bit of a dither because he's got to go and put down this rebellion. And then you've got, dare I say it, Richard Rich and William Cecil, two secretaries of state, sitting there quietly plotting to make sure that the restoration goes the way they want it. And would she, Jane's in the Tower, surely it would have been a case of making sure that she looked regal, which means that you've got all the trappings, you've got the furs, the velvets,
everything.
Well, possibly not the furs in summer, but, you've got the pearls, the headdress, the jewels, because she's having to cope with all of these high-ups of the council who are busy, or would be privy council. Plus, she's also got Guildford saying, "But I'm king." And she turns around and says, "No, you're not. I'm queen. You're only king uxure juris." So that whole political background, why would she be, we would want to see her wearing a French hood, wanting to see, wearing the furs, wearing the thing. So why would she be wearing something as intimate as a coif?
Exactly. Yes. Something so humble.
It's humble, but it's also what you wear to keep your long hair, because you've never had it cut. You probably sit on it. It's to keep it tidy and away. And of course, she's married. But you wouldn't portray her as that if she were queen, in my book, anyway.
Yes. I totally agree with you, because the Tudor queens were all about dress to impress. If you showed yourself as regal in beautiful, jewels that belong to previous queens, ermine signifying your status, very high status, royal status, then yes, Jane Grey probably would have been depicted and looking like a queen, not like some, humble girl from the countryside who just accidentally became queen. Although she later claimed that she was this accidental queen, because she said that, well, I didn't want that. But she was quite authoritative when she was queen for those brief moments.
Yes. But how much of that was because she had Guildford saying, "Oi, what about me?"
Exactly, that she had enough strength of character to say, "No, you're just a consort. You're my husband. I'm the queen." So that's pretty impressive, coming from a girl who's just 17 years old.
Yeah.
And whom we today collectively believe she was like a puppet. But was she?
No. No.
That's another question.
You can see that from her prayer book and the words that she writes in that.
Exactly. I don't think so either. I think she was quite authoritative, and that's admirable in someone so young.
Well, are they? Because let's face it, they could be married at the age of 12. And they would, if they're married, they're having to run a household. So you're going to have to be throwing your weight around. You can't sit there and think, well, I'll do that when I'm 18, when I've grown up a bit. And, we all know what people are like. You give an inch and they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a fascinating story, and it's going to run and run.
Yes, it is. It's amazing story, and we have all of the host of supporting characters in Lady Jane Grey's story women who were very strong, very powerful, very authoritative. We have Jane Grey's mother-in-law, Lady Dudley, who says, well, he will not come and sleep with you if he won't be king. So you better make him king. So that's enormous pressure, from your own mother-in-law, no less.
Yes, but if you're queen, you could still turn around and go, booyah, sucks to you.
Exactly.
I'll say when.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
That very true, yeah.
I just think that this whole thing is fascinating to me. And when I was doing some more research for this interview, when I was reading up on it, I really did not realize how long the attribution of this portrait has been up for question. I honestly, when it came out in the press that it was Lady Jane Grey, I thought, oh, wow, okay, a new discovery, something we didn't know about, until I started digging a little bit deeper. And like Sylvia mentioned earlier, I mean, we go back to the 17th century, at least, with this. This is nothing new.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it was also suggested, I think, in 2007 by Dr. Bender Grosvenor, that this may well be Jane Grey. So we have, like almost 20 years ago, art historian stating that this may be Jane Grey.
Was that when Bender was still with Philip Mould?
I think so, because that was in the catalog for the exhibition.
They did the Lost Faces portrait.
Yes, the Lost Faces exhibition, yes.
Didn't Starkey also make that attribution?
I think he was involved in researching, and I don't remember exactly. I was very young in 2007.
Let's not even go there.
Not yet as interesting. Not yet a historian, no.
I just completed my MA.
I'm not even commenting. Thanks,
Ancient
Sylvia.
Ancient times.
Way back in the era of 2007.
Yeah, very long time ago.
I just thought this whole thing was very interesting. And when I started searching art for articles about this, I was, and I don't mean to bash anybody, but one of the first articles that I pulled up, all of the quotes in it about whether or not it was Lady Jane Grey was from Philippa Gregory. And I thought, why were they interviewing Philippa Gregory to find out whether or not this was Lady Jane Grey? But I also don't.
She appeared on Time Team.
Oh, okay, all right.
And they did a big archaeological dig up at Groby.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she was involved in that. I think it's
the Anna Boleyn girl.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to hold anything against her, but we know that she is a historical fiction author. She does not write nonfiction on the Tudors.
She does, actually. She does. She wrote Normal Women, a very good book. About women in English history from 1066 to, I think, to modern times. I read that book.
How good was that book?
Podcast. Yes, Normal Women. It's a very good nonfiction read. So.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you.
Yes.
I was, when I got into the Tudors, or really when I got into the Plantagenets, was because of her. and her historical fiction books and The White Queen and The White Princess and The Red Queen and all of those. And I don't mean to discount her because she is a fiction author that she can't have an opinion on portraits. I don't want to say that because, like Melanie said, we all have this machine between our two ears where we can clearly see with our own two eyes. I felt like maybe she wasn't the right person to interview in that article. Like yes.
Yeah. Gregory's PhD was on English literature. So if you're looking at English literature and you're doing a PhD and going into it in depth, you're going to be looking at all of those sources, those original sources. You're going to be looking at Shakespeare. You'll be looking at all of the, the poets and John Donne and keep going, because I'm not literature at all. I have to go and dig around for it. So that's, I'm sure, where her interest, and I'm speculating here, came from. But she's got a good agent. And, Time Teams, you must have been a child, Sylvia, when Time Teams did that dig up at Groby.
I don't know, perhaps, but I know that I watched that on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I don't know which year was that, which year in the ancient history.
A long time ago.
Ancient history, she keeps saying.
Deliberately for laughs a little bit, yes.
So we know what Rebecca got Rebecca into being interested in the Plantagenets and things. Sylvia, what about you? What was it that got you interested in the Tudors?
I'm going to say it. I'm not going to be ashamed of it at all. The Tudors, the 2007 TV series with the gorgeous Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as Henry VIII.
It didn't look like Henry at all. Yeah.
That was good.
I know that a lot of people are ashamed to say that this was their so-called gateway drug to the Tudors, but I'm not. I think that the young version of me who watched that for 4 seasons was absolutely glued to the screen, and I loved every second of it. I'm not sure if I would be able to go back and rewatch it without judgment. Probably not. As a historian, probably not. But it was my gateway drug to the Tudors. I dissected that show like scene after scene, and I was very impressed how Michael Hurst, who wrote it and directed it, how he used historical sources, because there are actual quotes in the dialogue from the primary sources, from the letters, from chronicles, and I was very impressed with that. In retrospect, it's still very impressive. So the Tudors, I blame Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, maybe Henry Cavill a little bit too, as the dashing.
Henry, I have to say, was brought up on the same island that I was brought up on.
Oh, that's nice.
So they know each other.
No, we don't.
Let me list that.
Yeah, no, my stepfather, my father's a GP, and we went there in 1957. And then my mother ran off with the next door neighbour, if you like. But his family had been in Jersey since 1440, at least, because that's the oldest document that we've got in the Jersey archives mentioning the family. But yeah, it was, God, you're both so young.
I love that you're not afraid to say that it was the Tudors, because I feel like that's something I've been saying for years too, and people are so quick to judge. That show really brought to life the characters, these people, these historical figures. It brought them to life in a way that we had never seen before. And it wasn't just a couple of them. It wasn't a film. It was a lot of historical figures that we got introduced to.
Exactly, yes. Mm-hmm.
And they're normal people, with loves and hates and ambition, greed, power. For me, exactly. I have to say it's Wolf Hall I love for historical accuracy. But what got me into history was Hilliard.
Hottie
Hilliard. Because I was shown a miniature of that he'd done of an unknown woman when I was 13. Back in the mists of time. I'm not-
Are you like back when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth?
Yeah, I had a pet dinosaur. It's at the end of the garden.
I'm just kidding. You're not that old.
I'm glad you say so.
I love it. I love that we all have our own stories, our own origin stories on what brought us into history. And I absolutely love that we have art history to teach us and to show us. And we say this over and over again on this show that if it weren't for artists like Hans Holbein painting or sketching these people, would we be as interested in Tudor history as we are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question because the Tudors, they feel like they are like us because we can look into their faces thanks to Holbein and other artists as well, like Hilliard, Hornbouts, and so on. But I think that the artistic side of it, that we can still look at them and see them, like we know what Henry VIII's queens looked like, well, except Anne Boleyn.
And Catherine Howard.
And Catherine Howard, yes. They are faceless, but in general we have Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Parr, beautiful portraits, and I think it makes us feel so much closer to them as people.
Yeah.
When you're next in England, Sylvia,
yeah,
and if we can persuade Rebecca to come over at some point, I mean, you're just a hop, skip, and a Ryanair away.
Yes,
Let's
I'm very
go to
close.
the National Portrait Gallery. And I mean, to stand, as you know, to stand in front of those portraits, and you are literally within touching distance.
Yes.
But it's the same today. I mean, when I'm giving a talk on portrait miniatures, you know, how many people have got pictures of their loved ones on their phones?
Exactly.
Holding your hand. These people didn't have that. Only the rich and well-to-do could afford portraits.
Yeah.
Of any size. Which makes me think of Lady Mary. That was both of those Hans Ewers. They're expensive works of art.
Expensive, yes.
Melanie, do you have any idea, just from your work in art history, how much somebody would pay for a miniature?
Yeah, between £2 or £3, which is about the equivalent $2,000 to £3,000, which is about what you pay nowadays. And there's a great website called Measuring Worth that gives you a project cost, an economic cost, and a labour cost of any amount. And my research has been into Lavina Teerlink, and she and her husband built a house, and it cost £500 in those days. Well, if you take that as a labour cost, that's about $2.5 million today. You can get quite a nice eco house with huge footage and lots of big windows for $2.5 million nowadays, even in England. Which £500 was a lot of money. She must have been making her money come from somewhere. We know that George was a merchant, but hey, you know, there is still money in art, even today.
Yeah, now let's compare that to Anne Boleyn's £1,000 per year as a Marchioness of Pembroke.
Exactly. I mean, that's a huge income.
Huge. A wealthy landowner in an instant.
That's the fact, as an anointed queen, she had her own private income elsewhere, didn't she?
Yes.
Gosh,
that's very interesting, you know, to compare those sums.
Shall we also make a small comparison to, let's go back to Lady Jane Grey. Melanie, you probably know where I'm going with this, is the ward ship that Thomas Seymour, £2,000 in 1547 or 1548. I don't remember which year it was that he purchased her ward ship, but that was a lot of money for that time.
I mean, if you looked on Measuring Worth, you'd look at that as an economic cost as opposed to a labour cost. And that would probably still be knocking around the £1 million mark.
Yeah.
Which is
spectacular sum, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lady Jane Grey was an asset, right?
Well, she was very important. Yes, there were rumors that she would be married to Edward VI. So people knew her worth. So she was worth it, I'm sure.
Yeah, she definitely.
Sylvia, if she had been married to Edward, on the grounds of consanguinity, how close were they?
So Edward VI was the son of Henry VIII, and Jane Grey was the granddaughter of Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Tudor. So I'm really not good in this first cousin, second cousin.
Rebecca's done genealogy.
Yeah.
Come on, Bex.
I think off the top of my head, then I think it would be first cousin once removed.
So
quite close,
they would. That's too close. You might have ended up with some really strange genetic. I've only got to look at Philip II's jaw.
Oh.
We would have started the Spanish monarchy. Yeah, they were very closely related. That is for sure. I mean, I understand why Thomas Seymour would have proposed the idea of wedding Lady Jane Grey to his nephew Edward VI for multiple reasons.
But that was also probably because he wanted to counterbalance the offer of marriage from his brother Edward Seymour, because Edward and Anne, they wanted their eldest son to marry Lady Jane Grey. So
one way or another, she was going to end up with an Edward.
Yeah, either way, Edward it is.
But she ended up with a Guilford instead.
Which didn't turn out quite good for her, did it?
Oh,
unfortunately.
I mean, the only real portrait, sort of, if you like, post-mortem portrait is Delacroix's execution of Lady Jane Grey.
Yes.
But that was done in the 19th century.
19th century, yes.
It's big.
It's huge, yes. When I stood in front of it, I was quite surprised at the sheer size of it because it's so big. But it's also like you feel like you're standing in the presence of Jane Grey on that scaffold, like you are part of the scene, part of the depiction. So that's brilliant. That's very beautiful. But it also shows that how Jane Grey was represented. You know, this white satin. She's a victim. Everybody around her is fainting from desperation because she's so young, and she's about to die. You know. So interesting depiction, certainly.
Can we go?
I think a lot of those 19th century historical narrative paintings, you know, everybody goes, no, that's all romanticized and it's all. They actually have a charm and a sophistication which we've lost thanks to iPhones, Android phones, and the fact that we're surrounded by images all the time. You know, look at us. There's the three of us sitting here like the three women in the Scottish play.
Three women in three different countries.
Countries, exactly, yes.
Technology is unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
It is. I want to go back a little bit to when we were talking about the portrait having its eyes and mouth and ears X'd out. When I looked at, and you know, maybe I just didn't see the right images, but it looked like the X-ray version of it. I couldn't see it. I could see that something looked a little off about the eyes, but was I looking at the wrong image, or was that the one that I should have been looking at?
I think what it actually needs is you to be able to look at that infrared reflectography image as closely as Rachel did, because that will show it, and which is why the detailed report, which the owners of the portrait have, which we don't, will show. I mean, I don't know about you, Sylvia, but I've worked with all sorts of technical data because I get approached and do stuff on various people's things in collections. Get some really wacky ones at times, but when you get that detailed report, you get a whole lot more, and you get a much higher resolution image than's being given out to the press. Don't forget, the press are always very selective about to make a good story.
Yeah.
Which,
good point.
I mean, I'd like to see some pigment analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, we know that the NPG would probably be able to do something on the Mary Neville ones. And if you've got a comparison of the same pigments being there, you could blow the whole thing apart.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is any technical analysis on those Ewers paintings.
Interesting.
You know,
well, there's definitely a lot of work to be done still, I think.
And it's down to that. Down to money.
Yes, down to money, and also down to if they wanted to be proven to be somebody else, or are they dead set on Lady Jane Grey?
Okay, I just have to say something. With somebody who has a history and background in marketing, I do have to say this is genius on Wrest Park, because they talk about this and how this is going to be part of their displays, along with many other portraits that are going to be displayed. When I was reading it, I thought, oh, this is smart. This is really smart of them to get people to come and look at these portraits by saying that this one is Lady Jane Grey.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hurt.
Exactly.
Don't send me hate mail. But
okay, when you're over, and with the three of us are together, we don't go to the National Portrait Gallery, or we do both. We go to Wrest Park and cause money.
We go there definitely, and we look.
We throw our money at them and say, let us in the door so we can look at this too.
No. We play it so we get invited.
Oh, this is right. We'll get invited. Yes. They're not, after hearing this, they're probably not going to want to invite me. They're like, she's on to us. She knows this was a marketing ploy. Whoops. I can't help myself. When I see, you know, when you see it, you see it. And I just love that we were having this discussion today about this portrait and who it could be and who it couldn't be. And I can't thank you ladies enough for coming on today and talking about this, because it's so relevant right now. So thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you, Melanie. This has been
my pleasure. And it was
thank you so much.
Sylvia, it really has. It's been fabulous.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's been such a great fun to record with you two lovely ladies.
Thank you. And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.